All right. I'm Gabriel, product designer at UserActive. I work in a design agency. We're a small team, and we get to work with a lot of companies across different industries and teams from all over the world, honestly. So it's really great to have that kind of opportunity to interact with a lot of teams at the same time, to build products, and to create those relationships that are honestly long lasting relationships. Uh, Next one. I'm originally from Venezuela. I've been living in Spain for the last 8 years or so, and for all this time, I've been working on this industry and SaaS industry. Yeah, since basically since I arrived. This is a picture of our team at UserActive. We're very product team, and for sure you might have noticed or you might have seen familiar faces, maybe including mine. Was a picture for one of our best years where we grew the team a lot. And a couple of years ago, or last year, we were working on a lot on marketing campaigns in YouTube. So we have a lot of content, a lot of YouTube videos where we were kind of teaching design to SaaS founders. So you might be familiarized with that. Okay, kicking things off, I want to kind of paint the journey of the product design role. So from the very beginning, as a junior designer, we might use most of our time to design, only with the craft. So we're gonna be investing all of our time working on that pixel, getting our design skills, laying out, color scheme, typography, all of that. And as soon as we move into other other journeys, into our mid design, we're gonna see how we can build those engineer relationships, and we're gonna be more in line align with them to build better products together. And as we get into the senior role, our time is going to be more evenly split. It's going to be a combination of craft and collaboration. So we're going to be becoming partners with our development teams. We're going to be super aligned. We're going to make sure that all of what we do is feasible for engineers to work. All right. So before I jump into more complex stuff, I wanted to also paint the picture of is the hello, what is the common or the traditional product design role and kind of our task and our involvement in this collaboration stuff. So we're going to be often unaware of the technical infrastructure, the tech stack that the product is basically built on. We often underestimate the impact of our work, meaning deadlines, schedule, budget, all of this stuff. We're gonna struggle to anticipate any technical trade-off that we're gonna see as we build the product. We're gonna have limited communication with development teams, and we're only gonna be focused on the solution space and not necessarily very involved into what are the implementation plans. And we're gonna compare it now to what I call the product thinking designer, which is the complete opposite. So we have a very strong understanding of the technical capabilities and constraints, not only from our team, but also the product. We're driving more decisions that balance user needs, business goals, and at the same time, technical feasibility. And we're gonna balance our design goals more in line to implementation plans. We're gonna involve developers early on our design process, and we're gonna have a better understanding on implementations on developers, on challenges faced by developers early on without even prior to the implementation plans, before even get to ship, okay? And I want you to think about where do you currently sit at the moment. Have a think about whether you are somewhere in between, maybe you are just getting started, and if you are somewhere in between and you're trying to come to the product thinking designer side, I think that's really great. You're gonna get there eventually, and we're gonna see a few tactics on how to get there and how to build that relationship. All right. I have a quote that I find very, very interesting, which is from Don Norman. It says, "Engineers and designers, we simultaneously know too much and too little. We know a lot about the technologies, but we know very little about how other people live their lives and do their activities." And I find this particularly true to our case. even if we are engineers, we often work in silos. So we only focus on the pixel, we also only focus on the design file, but not necessarily try to understand what the other person from the other side is trying to communicate, is trying to work on, and how can we align, which is something that we care about. Now, no one really teaches you how to build those partnerships, right? Those relationships, but everybody expects you to do so. In my case, I learned a lot about taking initiative. What I mean by this is I personally started to take courses about product development, CSS, HTML, all of this information. I took it because I really wanted to put myself into their shoes, understand how they build product, how everything works together, and ultimately, how can I apply that knowledge into my case. Now, I'm not telling anyone to go out there and take a course because it's very technical, and by no means I'm a developer, nothing at all. But I can assure you that all of that knowledge I apply today, and I'm going to be applying it every day, even in the design file in Figma. Okay. Great. So we're going to talk about how we develop influence as a designer at every level, and we're going to split this presentation in three areas: how to build blocks of influence, navigating situations across challenges, and the two real button set tips. The first one, building blocks of influence. I think this information that I'm about to share, you can apply anywhere. And not only with your engineer peers, but anywhere, anybody that you want to maintain a relationship, build a relationship, and you can take it with you even further. Okay, the first thing is understanding who you are influencing, okay? You can build a power map, basically a list of engineers that you're gonna have to collaborate with. I have that graphic on the right, and it's just three different skill sets: design, front end, and back end. Okay? And so what I want you to think of when you picture your engineers or your developer peers is, where do they currently sit in that graphic? They might have or they might share different skill sets. For example, you might have heard of the term full stack developer. So that would be a combination of maybe all of those. Okay? So you might encounter engineers that they communicate one way or another. In a few cases, there is these engineers that are very methodical, very process oriented. And so whenever they're gonna jump into Figma, they're gonna take your designs as they are and implement it right away. What they see is what they're gonna build. But there might be other occasions in which your engineer, your developer, is gonna be somewhere in between design skills and front-end skill, and they're gonna be very vocal. And they're going to maybe have a strong opinion on what the work that you produce. So they're gonna come in and they're gonna voice over, hey, I might think that it could be done differently, right? I think we've been there by the face of it. Okay, so we might talk about how to approach that, but at the end, I want you to think about that. The engineers that they have these strong opinions, we share a common goal, which is we produce work because we care about the user. Okay, our end goal is make good design, good product. Okay, and that's a good consideration because that changes your mindset into, okay, this person is trying to help me. He might have a different intention, but we see how can we do that. Okay, so understand the working styles, and most importantly, what they care about, what motivates them. And if you can find an engineer that is somewhere in the middle, in between, that they share design skill, front-end skills, they're going to be unicorns, basically, because those are going to be your main advocates whenever you're building product. They're going to have a very strong opinion on design. They're going to advocate for users. And whenever you want to pitch some idea, they are going to be there to back you up. Okay. And lastly, get to know the different technologies and workflows that your peers are working with and the technologies that are mainly used to build the product. I have laid out a couple in here. There are plenty more. But most likely, if you're working with design systems and you didn't create that design system, but it's being taken from other areas, it's going to be most likely built in any of these, React or Angular, and that's going to be particularly interesting for you because you also need to figure out where are your areas in which you can influence that piece of information. If you're working with, I don't know, dashboards and you need to create widgets and stuff like that, most likely the developers are going to have some kind of resource that's going to be available that is plug and play, where you might not even need to design the whole thing from scratch. So you need to figure out what technology are they using so you have a better understanding on where you can apply your knowledge. Okay. Taking it forward, we are, now that we have a better understanding on what our audience is like and how can I approach them, we need to work on how to cultivate them as an allies. Okay, take it outside of your work environment. Look for shared goals, interests, any way that you can connect with your peers. It's a good thing, you know. You can build that kind of relationship that way, even outside of the common Slack commentary of here's the link, hey, designs are ready, but more towards like having a friendly working relationship. That's going to help a lot. You can also think of involving designers early on in your design journey or your design process, because one of the biggest rocks that I see is taking too long to share your work or your ideas. You know, in most cases, as a solo designer, we're going to have very little impact on the work that we want to push forward. So in most cases, we're going to need of an ally, especially engineer, developer, that can help us move it forward. So yes, share all of your insights, share your ideas, and it could be the smallest thing that you can use to validate your ideas. It could be a mock-up, an illustration, or just having a conversation, just to get the conversation moving, get the feasibility in check, all of that. Okay. We're gonna move into the second chapter, which is navigating situations across challenges. Just give me a second. Okay. All right. Here you can see an example of the ideal design process, right? If this were only true. So we start with research, brainstorming, all the way to shipping, okay? But if we come into the reality, is that it's a lot more chaotic, right? There is a lot of things happening all at once. Sometimes we don't even realize where we are at the moment. But let's zoom in for a second, because there are three main areas that they happen to be all the time in there. So spec, build, and ship. And if we take those away, there is a very small area that we can have a strong impact. It's going to be right there in between spec and build. Okay, once we have all of that clear, if we were cultivating those allies, if we have a very good understanding on our peers, now we move it to the next step, which is talk about how we're going to work together and establishing a rhythm of working. Okay, I have a couple of questions here, but I'm going to go through. But the main one is getting started with Figma. Okay, this is going to be very important because our developer peers, they work in a completely different environment. They're not used to design tools as they are. Okay, so make sure that your team understand how to use the commenting tools, how to move around Figma, that they know what it is for, what they can do. Have all of that clear. Okay, the next step is how to give feedback. And this is not only for you to share feedback with them, but it also works the other way around. Okay, it means when is it going to be when I am going to be ready to receive feedback from the engineer, and vice versa. When is going to be a good moment for you to hear me out when I want to share some of my feedback. And that's going to relate strongly to my other 2 points, which is early builds and tracking design bugs. Okay, make sure that you have access to development environments. Most likely they're going to have some type of link that you can access where they have early builds. where they have taken your designs and they're already working on implementation. So that would be an area in which you can have still a voice. You can still try to test how everything is coming together, if the flows are working nicely, all of that. And that's going to be something particularly interesting for you if you don't want it to be that long. Once the button is pressed, the publish button, you are going to have very little influence because it's very hard to go back into a feature and design something once again when the team is already focused on something else. So yep. Now that we establish a rhythm and we work through all of this, it just doesn't end there. One of the things that we need to do is keep on going. Okay, keep checking in with them, ask for feedback, continue working on that relationship because it's gonna pay off. This is not a one-time thing. Now I'm gonna share 3 handoff realities, and that's gonna happen everywhere, all the time. The first one is finding the designs that you need can be really hard. Picture this. For sure you're going to have, or you will be working on design files that are really big. You have a lot of screens, a lot of pages, flows. So whenever an engineer peer is coming to our file, are they going to be able to find something? Are they going to be able to find what they're looking for without having question, or they just, what's going to happen, right? The second one is that the design that you hand off is rarely going to get shipped, okay? This could be because of iteration process. And to be completely transparent with you, there are iteration processes that are happening outside of your reach that you might not even know about. And that's fairly common. For example, you might be handed off something today, but tomorrow you see something else getting shipped or being published live. And you are like, what's happening here? This is not what I was telling you to do, right? And you for sure get mad. Your portfolio gets affected because you cannot be sharing two different things. But the reality is that somewhere in between, product manager, another type of stakeholder has taken over without your consent, let's say, and there's been a change in priorities. Maybe they wanted to change the copy, an image, or something because they thought that that could have a better impact in numbers, metrics, you name it. But there's been a change on the direction, basically. So if we're working on that, it's going to be much easier for us to get a bigger picture, like, hey, what happened there? I would also like to be involved, and you can also apply this knowledge with your product managers. And then the third one is what's right at your fingertips. It's what's important, meaning that the file that you bring into the development side needs to be accurate, meaning as very little distractions as possible, so they can get to implement what you want them to see. Okay, let's talk about how we can increase discoverability. Again, I cannot emphasize this enough. Understanding of the basic feature set. What is a component? What is a style? How can I apply? How can I comment on the file? All of those things, including demo. Again, make sure that your developer peers, they know how to understand, they know how to move around. Think about this way. When they get into the design file, into the Figma, it's like riding the bike for the first time. It's going to be a wanky experience. So you want to make sure that you're there to support them on the journey on how to use the tool. Secondly, the file structure, explaining where can they find the word that they need, and if you can, you might want to have a structure where it's only design focused and another structure that is only the developer focused, just like in there. And a tip that I would encourage all of you to do is to create a getting started page all the way at the top. And in there, you're gonna lay out basic knowledge of Figma. Okay, let's talk about how can I export an image in the best resolution? What's the difference between purple box with a non-purple box? This kind of information. Yes, it could be in a Google Doc, it could be in some other type of format, but it's hard enough to get developers to get into the Figma file as they are. So why will I tell them to use a different tool when we are already in the Figma context? So it's something to have in there that is handy, basically. All of your files. Okay. All right, moving on to spec and statuses. Okay, here you're gonna see an example, my very own example of how I hand off design to engineers. Before I jump into any complexity, the main things that I want to highlight from here that you really need to pay attention to is basic information, right? Like if it's a flow, what's the name of the flow? What the flow is focused on? When it was the last time it was updated, this file? Who's the main POC, point of contact of this design? Make sure that, well, your face, your name, and a link to have a conversation with you is accessible. And something to have is whether this is a mobile app or a desktop app, something like that. And labels, label whenever this is ready for development, if it's still in progress, because that's gonna give enough context for them to find out what is ready, what is still in process. Okay. Another tip that I would encourage you to do is to have very little piece of information. Let's talk about what's the main goal, what is this feature about. It's just a nice piece of knowledge right there that you can share. It's going to be available for anyone, but it's going to make sure that you have a strong alignment with your team. Okay, if this flow is about an upgrade flow, okay, what is this upgrade flow about? What do they care about? This sort of information. It's like a brief overview. Okay, zooming in, I personally keep my handoff process really lean and straightforward. Okay, the main things that I focus on is if it's a flow, be it that everything is connected with lines. I have two types of lines. The straightforward, it's about the happy path. What's the main flow that I want to share? And then I have this other dash line that focuses on alternative paths. If we're talking about an upgrade, let's say if the card didn't go through, there is an error message, that would be an alternative path to somewhere else. So make sure you also communicate this. And then I have some commentary all over there that basically focuses on where do I foresee that there might be a complication in the handoff process. In here, well, I'm just highlighting that this information is going to be coming from a database. Which database? This database. But I'm kind of thinking ahead on where the information, where the source is going to come from, and where do you need to pay attention when building the product. Those are going to be the main areas. Now, I know that Figma is bringing up a lot of tools with the dev mode that you can use, okay? But the thing is, they are iterating so fast, they're adding so much features that it's just making it very much complex to keep up with all of these features. And again, it's hard enough just to get our engineer peers to get into the Figma file and see this. Do I really want to make the experience even more harder? Do I want to overcomplicate the handoff process with fancy tools, fancy tool tips, and for them to remember how these work? That's a question that you need to ask yourself. And this is not a one-time thing. This is going to be a collaboration over time. So this is what you might see in a month or so, but maybe in a year, this could be something else, but that's going to depend on the relationship that you have with the Figma experience and the time that you also have available to share and to create this, which we're going to talk in a second. Okay, another example is something like this. I'm going to share a little bit of context. We had a client that we didn't think they were going to stick around with us to be able to have a strong relationship with their team. So we said, okay, why don't we grab some time and we make a spec sheet. It's basically a very large document which covers most of the design that we did. We were picking design flows, we were annotating a lot of things, a lot of rationale behind, so that anyone from their team, including managers or anyone else, have all the necessary information to back this up, maybe in a Jira ticket, ClickUp ticket, something like that. This is very hardcore to do. It takes a lot of time. But anyway, it was an example. It was a situation that we faced. Went good. Okay. Um, all right. Yeah. Let's talk about resource management. I want to make a big parenthesis here because this is very, very important. I was made aware of how this works. And it's the basic understanding of budget constraints, time, implementation plans, deliveries, all of this kind of stuff. Just like I have as a designer, developers are also going to have. They're going to have tight deadlines that they need to build code, they need to start working on stuff, and we also have a lot of work coming our way. So now that I gave you a couple of examples on how to make your specs, you need to think on what's my availability to build those. Am I really going to be able to do a spec sheet like the ones you saw earlier, or just a couple of lines are going to make it work, you know? And you need to face the question, what's good enough for now? As we be building that partnership together, we're going to be in a better position to communicate and have a better management of their expectations. So we can be confidently say, hey, I might not be able to provide this, or hey, at this point, this is all I can do, but I'm going to be available. So whatever you see something, just hit me up. I'm going to be available for you. And it's that just piece of information, that piece of communication that makes the whole thing have a different perspective on how we approach, because they're going to be more confident to share things with you, to ask you for things, to make that design element. And whenever something is missing from design, they can come to you, hey, we're missing this screen, what happens? Because there might be situations where they don't tell you anything, but they have a way of implementing what you missed, that you might not like it. Okay, moving forward with another example. The next thing is how we can build a shared language, okay? I have a component, and I want to take this example a little bit more interactive. Um, what would you say, what name would you give to that component? Anyone? Drop down? Select? Anyone else? Giorgio. Huh? Giorgio. Giorgio. Okay. So to my point, us as designer, we cannot even agree on a name. We have different versions of how to name this. And that's one of the things that we might want to look into the efficiency bit, okay, prior to the handoff. And that's completely fine. You can have different names. It's just basically agreeing on, okay, what's going to be our foundation in the way that we build products. In our case, as we used to work with a lot of teams and products that they were already built, we faced these situations. They already have a design system in place. So it was up to us, because now they were just lacking a design team, someone who could now take care of this and manage it and make it grow. So how do we evolve this? As a designers, this is how things get fun. Is it though? So this is how it started. We basically grabbed what the Figma file was, and it started like that. I'm using a button as an example. But yeah, we had that foundation. And most likely the developers didn't even read, because they just don't have time to read through all the documentation, how to use a button, primary, secondary, most likely not. So this is how it started. As the project was growing and growing, when we faced moments in which we needed to scale it up. We needed more buttons to communicate different type of information. And so this is how it grew. So for me as a designer, maybe as a solo designer, this can cut it for me. This could work fine. I'm the main manager. I do my own thing. But then if I ask a developer if they need to find a button whenever they come into the file and they see this, do you think that they will be able to find what they're looking for? So that's another question that we need to face. How do we make our system or any type of design more user-friendly, right? In this case, dev-friendly, yes. So we need to figure out the way, and if this works for me, fine, but let's hide it, let's put it somewhere else and focus on how can we make this more accessible, more easier to find for peers devs. So we work on something like that. So this is more or less like a spec sheet. We took away all of that complexity that was I only needed it, and I created something that only the developers needed and wanted to focus on, which is a button. Okay, how many buttons do I have? I have three different sizes, and I want you to know that there are five different statuses and three variants: text only, icon and text, and then only icon. And I have two versions: with color, without color. That's basically it. Okay. Um, of course, I just didn't create this out of the blue. I was collaborating with engineers saying, hey, what do you care about? What information do you want to see? Is one example good enough, or you want two examples? How can we build this together? It's not just me. And so it was working. So the engineers were really supportive. We kept on moving. And we also took it successfully to our internal design reviews. So I also shared it with other peers, other designers, and we kind of make it like a template for whenever we wanted to introduce uh, another project. And so that became a new way of building systems that we can share with developers. And this is how we presented a new version of that design system. It's much more user-friendly, only focusing on what really matters, and it's much more streamlined. I want you to think about that this didn't take a week to do, okay? We have to remember what we discussed about resource management. How much am I going to be able to do this? How much time, how much effort, how many hours? Because we log our hours, we have other tasks, so we want to keep that in mind. But you can manage expectations. It could be my manager, it could be my other engineer peers, like, hey, I'm going to be working on this, give me some time, it's not going to be ready, but I can let you know about every time one component is right. And over time, we're going to have something that anybody could reference. Even new engineers, they're going to appreciate this a lot. Okay, as we are reaching the end, I'm going to share the two real but really set tips. And the first one is to seek support when you need it at any time. Okay, so we cannot always please everyone. Some people might think that you are very late at your deadlines and you're taking things really slow. So how do we manage that perspective or that expectation? And some people might just be difficult to work with. And so you might want to reach out whenever you anticipate. You might want to reach out to your manager and communicate, hey, this is what's going on. How can I turn this around? How can you help me overcome the situation? Because your managers are really there for you. Okay, you cannot do everything on yourself. So look support whenever you need it. And not necessarily your design manager. It could be developers who could have a better understanding of how that person is, what they care, what they don't care, this type. So seek for support. And then the last one, if people like you, they're more likely to listen to you. This is highly underrated. If you're a good person, you're really friendly, you want to look for things to talk about themselves, you want to look for those moments in which you can just, get in touch with that person, remembering the birthday, every time they go on a holiday, a good bonding, these kind of things. That's just going to help cultivate, like, hey, that person wish me happy birthday. And they're going to remember this, and that's going to make the whole relationship much more engaging, much more friendlier. And what we want is, like, I can reach out to you and tell you, hey man, I just can't do this. And that's what we want from developers. Just not to tell me just to tell me more information why they cannot make the design, and at the same time, why I cannot build that, so to speak. So yeah, there you have it. We can move into Q&As if you want. That's all we have for today.
Okay, questions. I have one. if you want.
Yeah,
Like to
go ahead.
start. Um, like from the designer point of view, of course, it would be ideal that developers would learn a little more of our tools, like Figma, Dev Tools, and try to learn how to navigate all the material that we give to them, because like many times it's very complex, right? But of course, we're talking about a relationship between two sides. So like it's not only them that have to learn like our tools, but also would be ideal that we learn like their tools, right? To have like a equal sided thing. So like uh do you think there are like this is the way to go, so like we both learn reciprocally like our tools and environment, or like it's more based on communication, as you said, like try to talk with people and try to understand what they want?
A bit of both, honestly. Communication aspect, there is a lot of communication, that's for sure. But if we continue with the example of a design system, you might be looking into tokens, right? How can we do tokens? So if you don't really understand how tokens work, I cannot expect that they figure it out for me, right? And that's a huge impact that we can have leverage on. For example, in Figma, they're just going to tell you, right, you can write this name and then they're going to figure it out. But I need to see how the implementation works, how time and effort is going to take from their end to change the whole infrastructure into a token. Why? Because I want it, because it could be effective. I can make my case. But if I do not have relationship with other engineers, it's going to be a hell of a lot difficult to make the transition from styles to tokens, for example. So we need to work on both at the same time.
So take notes of all the birthday of all the developers because it's useful.
Any other questions you may have? Yes.
Thanks. I wanted to challenge you a little bit on something that you said about something to do with stakeholders or product managers that maybe just change the scope and then you're sort of a bit lost in what you're doing. I just wanted to ask, what do you do to make sure that doesn't happen? How do you, because I know you've talked a lot about the relationship between designer and development, but how do you make sure with the product team as well, the product manager, that you're all on the same page?
That's a good question. And it depends on the leverage that you can take. You can see it as a turn down, like, hey, they just changed my design. Okay, why did they change it? Who can I get in touch with to see what was the rationale behind that change? And if that change is because I wanted to bump some metrics, okay, then let me grab that because I think there is a better way to do that. So it might not be your design, the original design that you wanted to implement, but it's going to be a version of their version, which is better than nothing that you do at all. Does it make sense? So yeah, that's basically see how you can influence other people into, okay, I appreciate, but let me see how I can tackle it from a design perspective and keeping in mind your goal. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
It was more around, very good response. More around, how do you make sure beforehand? Do you document? Are you sharing somewhere? Do you have certain meetings or sessions with everyone to make
Yes.
sure you're on the same page?
Yes, at the very beginning, we talked about how we can onboard engineers into our designs. And so that happens with meetings of alignment. Most likely, you're going to be involved in decision making meetings in which you're going to have direction or you might present your work. That's going to be the perfect place in which you can gather the feedback that you're listening, see the areas of improvement, and with a lot of active listening, which is not simple at all, but with a lot of active listening, you can spot it. Okay, let me grab this from now, and I'm gonna come up with another version. And you listen to other stakeholders' mindset. You can also see if they have the camera on. You can also see their face, their expressions, and accommodate your presentation accordingly. Okay, cool. Did you have a question?
Yes, I had a question regarding your process. So I wonder how you, so developers has their own sprint, and does the design team also is the part of the sprint, or you work separately? And also how you have these sessions with communications with developers. So it's the session with product owners, with everybody, and development team, or it's separate sessions, and how you combine everything and everybody, how you align everybody?
Mhm.
Because it's also what I see on my product, that we like have different visions. We are on different planets, because I do not see that management, they really understand why we have to work together, design team and development team. And development team can just do not have a lot of questions to designers. So for example, I share all the information from them, but they do not read them, or they do not ask many questions, but they have to.
Mhm.
So how you figure out with all these processes, and maybe you have some suggestions for my case.
Okay. All right. So those were a lot of questions as well.
Yeah.
But that's fine. I mean, at the very beginning, when we're having those meetings where we have all different stakeholders listening to my design presentation, what I'm sharing with them, that happens. And we have product managers, engineers, even CEOs, founders from different areas. So that's the right moment where we align. And we even talk about what will be the future like. What are we going to be focused on next? What are going to be the next priorities? And that's going to be the perfect place for all of us to align. If anything goes away from that alignment, there's going to be people that just going to go down. They're just going to be misaligned, and we need to reference back wherever we put this in writing. It could be uh, the transcript of the meeting, somewhere where you can back this information up. That's going to be one point. Uh, to your point of not having the developers coming to you, not checking your design, always make sure that one of the things that I do is checking with them. Hey, how did you find this design? Is there any question that you might have? And I do this regularly. You know, they might be in a mindset in which I just don't have time, and that's something that they need to work on. That this is not the only way to build product. We need to figure out a way in which that makes sense for both of us. So I'm going to make sure that I knock your door whenever I see something. If nothing is going on, I care that if nothing is really going on or nothing is working. So might as well just check in with them, see how they're going along. And if you have access to that development area, you can make sure that you can voice your voiceover. Sorry, that you can increase your influence in there. You might want also to think about in how you can have individual meetings with engineers where you can guide them through your design. Because if we are thinking on, okay, I involve engineers at the very beginning so they are more in line with what we're building, what we care about, they can share whether it works or not, if they can do it or not, all of these things. But we also want to maintain that kind of momentum that they keep the alignment on. So hey, let's have a quick meeting. I prepared the handoff project for you, and I would like to go over with it, go through with it. And so you record that meeting and you make it a piece of reference for everybody to have. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and do you have the grooming sessions with developers, or they work separately? Like, for example, they have some, they receive some acceptance criteria for with your design, and they have their like collaboration. Then they discuss all what they have, and do your design team does your design team is it the part of the sessions, or you just have separate calls with developers just make overview of your design?
We only reach until the point where I share those designs. We can have a meeting about that, we do, but then when they take over, there's very little that I can do. There's very little that I can do. That being said, I make sure that I also become an extension of their team. I also want to be in line with the QA process, quality assurance. So I always try to reach my hand, hey, how can I get early access? Or how can I review what you're working on? So I have a better sense on where they're currently sitting to have a better impact. Yes?
Thank you very much.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Any other question?
Yes,
Yes.
I have one. Well, I don't know your environment perfectly how it is, but I imagine that it's very complex because it's a digital agency. But my question is, how do you manage the source of truth in that place? That
What do you mean?
I mean, the source of truth. I mean, where is in code, in design? Imagine if a PM asks for a change, and you do the change directly in the design, and
Okay.
then the devs they don't know anything. So how can you manage that? Not you, your company.
We have uh, two sources, one being the design file, because we normally have design reviews. In the design reviews, where we have this big meeting, and it's where we capture most of the feedback. So that becomes one source of truth, where we capture what they say in their comments. The other source of truth is the product management tool. It could be ClickUp, Monday, Notion, you name it. And that's going to make of a record of what's really going on. What are the priorities, not only for today, but the ones upcoming and the ones that they already passed. And each ticket is going to have your time, it's going to have comments, it's going to have any file or any recording that you might have. Hey, I'm sharing this quickly. This is how I have an iteration that I was working on. And then you upload that as a video format or something like that. And that becomes where you have your proof or your source of truth regarding that specific task to that specific feature involving this amount of people. Cool.
Well, it's cool because the question is because I think that sometimes we don't have any problem collaborating designers with developers, but we need to have that like source of truth to to keep alignment because if not, we don't know what we are talking about.
Yeah.
In some scenarios, in some companies, we have problems. So.
Yeah, it makes sense. It depends on the type of company that we're working with, but most likely our role is just not going to be about design per se. It might involve a little bit of product management. It could be then up to you in that case to have run a little pilot. Hey, why don't we work next time? All of the things that we want to share about this project or about this feature, we just put it on this ticket, for example. And little by little, you have that reliability and you build on those relationships and those that momentum that you want to gather.
Mine is similar to her. How will you fix, like you showed the example of the drop down. In my company, it seems that the designers use the drop down name, and then you see the library that the devs use in Storybook, and they have select, drop down, and I think another name. So how will you fix in the context of a design system these misalignments? If you had to do a plan to fix these kind of issues, what will you do?
Okay, that's a good question. Um, I would probably leave it up to them. I will say, okay, which name you wanna give it to that component, because they already have a way of managing those type of elements, and most likely is because they just grab it from somewhere else, and that happened to be the name that they gave it to, and they adopted that. But it's going to be difficult for me to change that mindset. So I need to pick the fights that I wanna, that I wanna go along with. I cannot win everything, but I can pick which fights I want to be involved in, and maybe that's something that you can be okay with. Okay, you want to call it drop down? Let's call it drop down, but let's make sure that it's going to be referenced as a drop down across the product. So we make sure that we are aligned together.
Even if you think that it's not the way to go, because in our case, for example, the Bible is undesign, and our undesign is a library,
Mhm.
and they have select and drop down, and they use it indistinctively, and I just landed there and I don't understand it. So you say that you have to prioritize their decision over the good one that you think it's the good one.
Okay, interesting. In those cases, you might want to uh, have a separate meeting with the development team. Like, hey, we have these two components that they serve different purposes, but somehow they are called the same way. And that's back to my point of effectiveness. Whenever we are trying to reference one of those components, I want to make sure that we both reference the right one. And it might happen that you're working on the architecture of the platform and you're saying, when are we going to use this component over this, and so on. So that could be one of those situations in which you can say, these are the differences. We need to make a decision because you're picking the not the right one, and I'm also getting confused. So how do we name this? So, but you put it like on the table for everyone to see, like there is an issue with the way that we're working. That is causing struggles, not only for me, but across the product. If they see the bigger picture, if you make them see the bigger picture, that's going to be more easier to have influence over them.
I think you were first.
I have a question. So when you build your prototype, sorry. Okay. Now it's okay.
No, like for other people to live through years.
Yeah, it's okay. Like, okay. So, me, for example, I write a lot of notes next to my mockup to explain the developers, like, I was thinking about that, or like maybe if there is a micro interaction or something, because I know developers don't look the prototype mode, they never do it. So I use a lot of notes next to my designs. Also, the PO or PM is written a lot of things in the tickets, so like the specs and everything. Plus, we also have things written on Notion, for example. So it's like three different, like, yes. And it's difficult because sometimes there's a change, so I'm going to change my notes in Figma, but then there is no, like, they didn't change it in the tickets or in Notion, and so we have three different places with different things. So how do you do for that? Like, do you have tips?
Okay. Yes. For that case, I would recommend you. It's completely fine if you have to reuse your information several times. If you want engineers to look into the prototypes, you might want to consider creating a video and helping them go through the prototype with you. If you're talking about specific interactions or animation, they rather see it visually, like, hey, this is a video, we can go through it, and this is how you can, it will be better explained for you, rather than just sticky notes, for example. That might be one approach that could help you. And secondly, yes, you are going, most cases, have to duplicate information that you put in Figma because your PM and other stakeholders, by that matter, are not going to be in Figma all the time. So they are most likely to reference the ticket in Notion than your Figma file. But you still want to make sure that you involve or you make aware other stakeholders through, in your case, Notion. And that's something that we will have to deal with. Yes, absolutely. All right.
Well, my question was, I want to ask you if you have any recommendations for updates and how you or how would you document that changes. For example, we are facing in my company some updates and changes in the product, and we have to update the library. So if you document the first library and then you have a lot of updates and changes, how do you send to the developers what or which components have been updated? For for example?
Okay, that's a good question. I really like it because most likely on your Slack or your communication tool, you might have channels for each of the features that you're building, most likely, right? So in that case, if your file is being updated very often, or your design system is being updated very often, one of the approaches that you can take is creating a newsletter. And just like any other project or any other product, they share updates. Hey, this month we released X amount of features. You can apply that same context into your team with the Slack. You can create every Monday, we share design updates. Hey, these are the components that were updated. This is how they changed. You can even create a little video, very tiny, keep it as lean as possible because you also don't want to invest a lot of time on it. And also other peers, they don't want to watch a very long video. But keep an eye on what could be the good enough in that case, because that's just going to be a tool for you to share knowledge across very efficiently. Yeah, it's like the stand-up every morning, if you think it that way.
And you recommend like documenting how this component has been changing through time? Because for example, we maybe there's a small change, maybe just a padding or just a, I don't know. We change the token of the text box. Do you recommend like keeping documenting these changes, for example, in Figma or in another?
I will recommend highlighting very big changes if the whole component change all of a sudden. And those little things like we change the typography name, we change the padding, these little things as an overview. For example, at the very bottom of your newsletter, you can say, and these other buttons, they change in terms of usability. And that can combine like many things, but there are very little, just not to give them the spotlight because they don't need it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, any other questions? Yes.
Thank you. So, can I just jump into the conversation about select versus drop down? So, I was wondering before, because to your point that to get on alignment with developers team is I wouldn't, if I may, of course, I wouldn't just be eager to throw my understanding of my I don't know taxonomy on the developers. I would just withdraw for a bit and see how they call it in the code, because then when you have discrepancy in the code, then it's really hard for the product team and for the developers that come and go to keep the code very like lined and streamlined within the company. So that's like my approach to just it's not worth the battle to be honest. But I have a question for you. I was wondering, how do you handle discrepancy between the product that is being shipped, that were some features, let's say, behind your backs, yes, that were developed and then shipped, versus the prototype that you've developed, and yeah, that doesn't matter about the the portfolio. We can laugh about it, but it's just like when there's the where is the balance between being having a live product versus the documentation that you handle within the company.
Okay. If I understood clearly, you're talking about the way that they name the coding structure compared to your design?
No, it's more about when you have a Figma file, right? And you just hand it over in some way or form to the developers, and then they're developing the product, and then there's a live, and then you see that in the live version there are some discrepancies between the product and your prototype. And what then? So how many times do you want to go over this loop between what's live and what's in the prototype?
Okay, interesting. I will mention again to choose the battles that you want to fight. We can be very picky as designers, like, hey, this padding is not correct, this spacing is not the best, We can be, very picky with the detail that we want. In that case, I will just recommend to focus on the bigger picture. What do they really care about? What is what really makes an impact. If it's the button that all of a sudden it became super big, or like big changes in which I can really say like, hey, this is not a good experience. How can we do to improve it? So let me get back to you with a different version, and we can work it out again. But that should happen just before it goes to shipping, because once it's shipped, development, they just start the different sprint and they're going to be focused on another feature, and it's going to be much difficult to go back to change something that was already shipped. So after you hand off, make sure that the communication is going and that you have access to their development environment, so you can test, that you can make sure, okay, these are the design details that I care about because they are affecting the experience, and these are the design details that I can let go of. And so you can say, communicate confidently with your dev, hey, I found these bugs. What can we do to manage them? In most cases, you want to take the leadership on that case and being heard in terms of, okay, I'm going to create an issue list, and I'm going to list out in tickets what are the issues that I found. And let's see how we can fit that into your development or your building process. Does that make sense? Super.
Can I add something? Because I found this. I can speak up.
I do the giraffe.
Thank you. No, it's a super interesting issue because and we're talking about processes here. I think that the real important aspect of this thing that we're talking about is beyond design and beyond code is a process that makes sense and articulates the departments or the teams. So when as designers we hand off some material and the developers implement these components or this process, there should be a testing process step, and designers should be there. And if that is formalized in the process, you will have the chance to detect every single thing to keep consistency. And in this process, it's a matter of ownership and convincing people with strong arguments, like saying you don't want them to think or interpret that you want to defend your design. Yeah. I don't think it's we own the design. It's not our design. It's an anticipation of the product that will be valuable for the user. What we want is to protect and keep consistency. And when you say to the PM or PO, I want consistency, I need consistency, and the product needs to have the highest standards, they will include you because you're adding great value to the process.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah, for me, it's a struggle between when you do that you mentioned, and then you have and then there's the situation that the PM or someone goes, I don't want to say behind your back, but sometimes that happens, right? When the just business comes and drops a feature, and then you have a product and you have a prototype, and it's like you just need to sue around somehow to keep this consistency, because we will be coming back to the prototype to develop another features or whatever sites or something, right? So it's like this is like the constant juggling between stakeholders and then keeping the process live and keeping the product going live smoothly. So it's like I find it very stressful.
There's another thing. Some companies put in practice, some others not maybe, but you have the deploy and the releases. The deploy is an internal staging, and it's not out there still, and that's when we might have the opportunity to tackle the adjustments. But again, it's a matter of articulating, as you said. It's a matter of, hey, let's agree on a framework and give me the space to protect the quality of the standard and the highest standards. I will be there. I will. You can count on me. But if you don't have the chance to speak out in that time, and there's not a framework to guarantee that, it get loose, and you have to synchronize whatever is live with your Figma, and you lose consistency, and the product goes down.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. Actually, I want all of you to think on ownership as a concept. Many of these things, as you might have seen, is going to be basically on you to work with other people. If you can take maximum responsibility, ownership about the things and your intention, I know it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort and willpower to do so, and maintaining it's like a really hard work. But if you take ownership of if the product goes out there and it's not a way in which I agree because of XYZ, it's going to be my fault. So how can I make sure that I'm being part of that decision making, that I have influence, and I can use it as leverage uh, at some point in my career in the future? Because if you solve the problem once, they're going to look after you, they're going to trust you basically. And if you keep adding to that influence and you keep on being there for people, they're going to rely on you, and then the whole thing is going to be on your favor. Whenever you ask, hey, I want to be part of that meeting, hey, why don't we think of this different process? Okay, then who's going to take care of that process? I'm going to be the ownership. Is someone else going to do the things that I care? Because if not, they might be focusing on something else. So who's going to be the task assigned to? So keep that in mind whenever you want to build some influence and you want to, fit in wherever you are not at the moment. Cool.
Cool.
All right.
More
thank you.
questions?
You ask questions.
Going back to what she said about how you manage communicating when you do breaking changes. So in the design system, for instance, if you say we added this component, the devs will say okay. But if you say we made this change or this other change, maybe they will have a hard time managing or getting to understand what is the impact on their work as devs, the changes that are done in the design system. So I have seen that the devs use the versioning system, Semver.
Mhm.
I wanted to ask you and all the people in the room if they have seen this applied also in design. So putting the semantic versioning, I think it's named.
Mhm.
So to identify when a change is a major change, a minor change, or a bug fix. So you have it on a document, and they can keep track of the changes if they affect how they affect their work.
Okay.
I don't know if I explained myself.
Yeah, I think so. Let me put it this way: everything that has to do with maintenance, it requires a lot of work. So if you are thinking of that newsletter that I mentioned earlier, or you're thinking about more ways in which you are adding more tasks to yourself, you need to think about if that's worth like keeping a record of. If we're talking about updates to the design system, to the padding, is that something really that I want to invest my time in, or maybe it's something else? Because most likely developers are not going to do so because it takes a long time, it takes a lot of work. So, do you want to pursue something that might not be even taken into consideration? Because you also need to, help yourself and make the process linear for yourself as well. And there is a feature that is you can do versioning. It's in Figma, but I think it's like the highest tier of the pricing model. So it's only for enterprise or something like that, most likely. Um, Anyhow, take advantage of the archive section in your Figma file. You can put there all your older versions of your components or your designs that you can reference every now and then if you need to. Again, bigger changes, nothing like really minor, but something that you could see the evolution of your components. It might not be a document, it might not have a lot of description, but it's going to be there. It's going to be for you and for anyone at some point if you want to go back to that design. Does it make sense?
So make our lives easier, but don't make it complex. It's not needed. So a simple change log.
That's also in life.
That's also enough. Okay, thank you so much.
All
Thank
right.
you, Gabriel.